Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and thanks for joining me on a rather chilly, wintry morning in New England. So today I wanted to talk about this amazing combination, the EF 300mm f2.8 lens Mark II combined with the Canon R7. And this combination is what I like to think of as my baby 500 f4 lens. So let's jump into it. Okay, so I apologize first for wind, as always, but also for planes and trains and automobiles and birds and dogs and all the other things that you might hear today. I'm in a reasonably public park, and there are all of these different types of commotions. In fact, I think that's a train coming right by, and you might see a plane go overhead because we're right near an airport. It's kind of funny because we have all the subject recognition items that modern Sony and Canon cameras carry on them. But anyway, I digress. So the combination I wanted to talk about today, the 300 f2.8 and the R7, is something I've been using for the last couple months. I really like this combination as a carryable wildlife combination. It weighs in at about 5.5 pounds, but it's very well balanced. So you can balance it on one hand and shoot. Very easy to kind of handle, move around. I mean, it's not light by any means, but I handhold this and I carry this all day long, and I haven't had really any trouble. The hood is this entire section that you see here. So the actual camera lens is not as large as you might think, and it delivers really wonderful, beautiful blurred out backgrounds, wonderfully shallow depth of field, beautiful bokeh, incredibly sharp lens, wide open, and that's all the characteristics that really combine well with the R7 to make it an interesting wildlife combination. We got some geese. And to understand exactly why that's the case, we have to think about a little bit around the maths for those on the other side of the pond, around crop sensors and the effect that EF or full frame lenses have on those crop sensors. So commonly we think about is just you multiply that crop factor, in this case 1.6 for the R7, times the focal length of the lens, and you get your effective focal length. And that is true. You are kind of cropping in with the sensor to an effective focal length, in this case of 480 millimeters, which is great, around 500 as I mentioned at the top. But you also need to consider what happens to depth of field on the lens as well. This shot wide open at f2.8 is not a 480 millimeter f2.8 lens as far as depth of field goes. You also have to multiply that crop factor times the f-stop, or the maximum aperture, to get what it would look like in terms of depth of field. So in this case, we're talking about 2.8 times 1.6, and we get something around an f4.5 depth of field. So what you have here is a 480 millimeter f4.5 telephoto combination when paired with the R7. And that's why I think of it as a nifty 500 f4, because you are essentially getting that type of combination. Just gonna wait for another prop plane to go over. This is actually, I shot a couple electronic shutter frames of the prop planes, and you can get a pretty good feeling for the rolling shutter on the R7 with doing that. But anyway, the one thing though that the 2.8 in this case of the wide aperture of this particular lens helps you with is it does, when you put it on a crop sensor, you do not change the light gathering capability of lenses. So when shooting wide open at f2.8, you are still getting that amount of light on the sensor. And that's important because it allows you to keep your ISO much lower, which is really good for these crop sensor camera bodies, because as we know, they are prone to higher noise at higher ISO. So I'm able to shoot routinely below my cap of 12,800 on the R7, frankly well below ISO 4,000 in all but the most dark environments, like really early morning or forest floors. And even in those situations, I never go above 12,800 even in early morning, and that to me is one of the big advantages of using this combination. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the sharpness of this lens. It is wonderful. I just Oh, I love it. I love this baby. And it is so beautiful wide open at f2.8, or even with a 1.4x teleconverter on the R7 at f4, it is still really wicked sharp. And I think that is, if anything, the best part of this combination. You get really tack sharp images that are available to you right out of the gate, wide open. And this is one of the things I thought about a little bit, because when you put the 1.4x teleconverter, let's let this plane pass. When you put the 1.4x teleconverter on this camera body, and I've done that, and really it performs very well. It changes this into a 680 millimeter effective focal length with a depth of field of f6.3. And we do that, the depth of field, again by taking f4, which is what you end up with when you put the teleconverter, because you lose a stop. So you have f4 times 1.6 equals 6.3, or thereabouts. And when you have that combination, you could say to yourself, well, I could put like a Sigma 150 to 600, on a full frame camera, and I can get 600 f6.3 at the wide end, at the telephoto lens rather. And so we're talking about 680 versus 600 millimeters, both at f6.3. But the difference is that this is really tack sharp at 6.3, f6.3. So you are getting, full capability of the lens almost, at that long focal length, and that is pretty exceptional. You don't have to stop down. The other thing that's nice about it is, of course, you are also getting that 300 millimeter range, or in this case the 480 f2.8 or f4.5 effective focal length and effective depth of field. So you have that versatility of shooting basically like the 500 f4 or something like a 700 6.3, and so that combination to me is really appealing. So you're taking this large circle for the full frame lens, and you're looking at just a smaller middle portion. And then what the 1.4x or 2x teleconverter is doing is they're taking that same segment, that smaller section, and they're magnifying it. So they're highlighting any problems you might find. So you're putting a lot of pressure on that center segment of the lens and how sharp it is. Now this particular lens is incredibly sharp, so yes, it performs really well on the R7 and with the teleconverter with the 1.4, but when you put that 2x on there, it's just pushing it a little too far, and I think you surpass the maximum resolution of the lens, and you also start to introduce and amplify really a lot of the tiny little errors that are in the lens, which are inevitable but become more of an issue when you're doing it with the 2 times on a crop sensor. Got a JetBlue plane there. So all that's to say, this combination is really, really interesting to me, and you're able to get beautiful shots in the early morning with the R7 with lovely blurred out backgrounds, and it's still in a hand-holdable, easy to carry format. And for me, that was really the most important part of buying a lens, was that I'd be able to walk around and hand hold it on hikes with birding walks and wildlife walks and just hiking around. It's also a beautiful portrait lens, I should mention as well. I've shot a couple portraits of my dad and others using this lens, and it does deliver those beautiful bokeh balls behind the subject. So even on the R7. So I love it. I adore this combination, and I think more people should consider it. So if you're interested in this, there are a couple things to note. So there are 3 different versions of the Canon EF 300 2.8. There's a non-image stabilized version that came out maybe 40 years ago, and that version goes for about $1,000 or less. US dollars, and that lens is actually very, very sharp. I've read. I haven't used it myself. Super sharp, but heavy, over 6 pounds, 6.5 pounds or so. No image stabilization. Quite heavy and a little bit of a beast to carry around. Perhaps I would argue a little bit too heavy to carry around. Then you go into the version 1 of image stabilized. Now this version is about $2,500 maybe or so, and this version has image stabilization, is a little heavy as well, over 6 pounds still, I believe, but but getting kind of into more what we would associate with modern kind of lenses with image stabilization. Now that lens and the earlier version are no longer covered by Canon. So, if something goes wrong, you need it repaired by a shop that can repair it, and you need to find repair parts. The version that I have is the more expensive of the group. It's still covered by Canon. It's still a current lens. I think they're still producing them even, though I'll check that. And this lens used goes for about $4,000 to $5,000. I got mine for $4,000, so I got a pretty good deal, relatively. And this lens is lighter, and it has the updated modern image stabilization of 4 stops, I think, of optical stabilization. And it weighs in at about 5 pounds, the combination about 5.5. So, or 5.5 to 6 pounds, something around there, with the combination of the camera and lens. So all that's to say, choose your poison. But if I were interested in this and had to just get the non-image stabilized version or the IS1, I would do it, because I think it's still really exceptionally sharp on this camera body and will perform really well. The version 2, the one I have, does perform better with the teleconverters, particularly with regard to tracking subjects. So that's just something to recognize. And a word, I'm not providing financial advice here, but a word about lenses and how they retail value. When you buy a used lens, you're already taking that hit. Just like with a new car, it's worth a lot less the second you drive it out of the lot. And the same thing's true with these lenses. Once you use a lens for a little bit, most of the value loss occurs. So this lens retails, I think, for like $6,500 new. So, when you buy it for $4,000, that's already 2/3 of the price. So I don't actually anticipate this losing that much value. And for what I use it, how much I use it, it's worth it to me, because it's a lot cheaper than renting the lens. Resale value is pretty good on these great white lenses. So I don't stress too much about buying it, but of course you are sinking a lot of cash into the subject for a long period of time. Okay, the final thing I want to talk about was comparison. So when you think about this lens, you might think about also other telephotos that are available and particularly pair well with the RF mount. So one of them would be the RF 100 to 500. And I have that lens, and I used to use that lens all the time until I got this one. It's way easier to carry, so much lighter. At 3 pounds, it's almost like you're not carrying, a telephoto lens. It's really compact. When you extend it out, it's almost the same height, but when it's just kind of next to it, it's actually maybe 2/3 of the height. Very easy to handhold. Takes a 77 filter thread, so pretty easy to use. So all that is, that's a pretty nice lens, and it's easy to use. Now, the problem I have with that lens is the maximum aperture, as many people talk about. It's a very sharp lens, and it's beautiful wide open. I have no problems with that, but because it doesn't let in that much light, it is a chore to use that lens when you're shooting wildlife or any moving subject early in the morning or afternoon, or any time when it's not broad daylight. And that's not because of the camera's performance. It actually performs even much better, frankly, than this combination in terms of image stabilization. So you can shoot as low as 1/15 of a second even on that camera combination of the R7 and the 100 to 500. But if you have a subject that's moving, even if you can gather a lot of light at that low shutter speed, you're still going to have a moving target, and it's still going to be blurry in your subject. So because of the demands of wildlife photography, it's not a great lens in any low light situations. In addition, there's the RF 100 to 400, and that's a phenomenally sharp lens and an incredible bargain for the money. Very, very sharp lens, but it is, again, more of a daytime lens. So if you're looking for something that performs well in lower light conditions, which are when I like to go out, it's when the wildlife's out, that is a challenge, because there really are no reasonably priced RF lenses or EF lenses that are hand holdable, very large maximum aperture that allows a lot of light in for those low light situations, and tack sharp. And to me, this became basically the one to look at. Obviously, if I had infinite money, I would look at the 400 f2.8 because it's only a little bit tighter than this one in terms of its zoom, and it's still a 2.8, or 500 f4 Mark II. But that's now we're starting to get into the $6,000 or $7,000 range, and it's also a heavier lens at about 7 pounds. So all that's to say, for me, that wasn't the best combo. This was already very much stretching my budget. So anyway, that's really all I wanted to talk about today. Just to bring this combination to your attention, to talk about how flexible a system it is, how light it is, how easy it is to carry, and the beautiful shots that you can get with it. So take care, be well, and get outside, and I will be back with some sort of review on the R7. And the TLDR on that one is that this is a great camera. It takes very sharp images. The pixels on subject cannot be beat right now in the Canon lineup, but it is really hampered by its shutter options. And whether you're shooting an electronic shutter and you have to suffer that really egregious rolling shutter, or whether you're shooting mechanical or electronic first curtain shutter, even that one suffers from shutter shock up to very fast apertures or shutter speeds, in my opinion. So I've observed a lot of problems with this camera, but I still get sharp shots out of this combination. That's my sign. All right, take care. See you next time.